Kamala, thank you so much for joining us today to talk a little bit about you and about Interstate and this project that's very exciting that we're looking to launch this week. And I'm curious, you have developed a career in an industry that is famously habitual about the way it approaches creation and new work. And everyone has a slightly different way, but it has always sort of followed a model. And rather famously now, you don't tend to follow models. You tend to make your own space when you are creating. And I'm curious what your experience was like on this piece and how it was maybe a little different than projects you've approached before.
Yeah, so this piece is interesting for several reasons. One of which is that the genesis for the piece really came from Jenny and Kathy, who are not only the librettists, but they are also starring in it. And that that is something that changed over the course of us working on it. When they first came to me, they said, we're interested in making something that we can perform together. We're looking at Eileen Wuornos, who was famously called the first female serial killer, although that isn't quite accurate. And they asked if I would be interested in working with them on it. And I said, sure. And then several months go by and they come back and they have this script that is now not about Eileen Wuornos, but really more sort of focused in on friendships between women and how those change over time and how society treats women of a certain socioeconomic status. And Kathy was now acting and playing one of the characters. So that was interesting because I have a piece that's just a murder mystery piece where it turns out the killer is the pianist at the end, but that was meant to be kind of a big joke. I've never worked on something where the person who is providing all of the accompaniment is also in the piece in this way. And so that was exciting to think about as a challenge. Like, how do you integrate Kathy's character in a way that makes sense, but also allows her to actually play the piano? Yeah. So that I think is one thing that sets this apart. And it also is a continuation of something that I started to explore during the pandemic when we were forced to be separated and trying to find ways to perform together over Zoom. I started using this combination of modern chant notation with aleatory, which is a sort of a chants element in the score, to give performers the ability to sort of coordinate without the need of a pulse, like a common sense of pulse. And what happened was that the performers I was working with really made the text their own in a way that they can't if you are, if you were writing the rhythms down. And so I decided to continue playing around with that in this piece, since there were only two people coordinating with each other. And I think the result is really amazing what Jenny does. With her vocal colors and also just her acting choices, the ability to give her the flexibility to do that was really fun.
Have you had, when they first looked at it, was that something that they immediately took to, or did they have to ask questions about what your intent was there? And because I imagine, I'm a former singer and you are too, and we were, we're always taught that you follow what's on the page. And so to be given a little extra freedom for them, I'm imagining, was different.
Yes. And I think you can sort of see that from the first workshop version of the piece to the form that it's taken in this film, is that they were much more strict with the rhythms the first time they did it. And now I think they've settled into it and found the place where they can stick to the score, but also it's their interpretation of what the meaning is. I didn't give it to them. So
yeah. And what is that? It's a special skill or trait that you have, I imagine, developed in yourself to sort of offer that to the performers, because that's not always what composers do. And
no.
I'm also not suggesting that it's good or bad. It's just different. It's exploratory. Yeah. And is it something that that you imagine you will want to keep in your arsenal of tools, or is it something that you feel like you will focus more exclusively on? How has working in that way changed your approach?
Well, I have always been interested in collaboration and in how to approach creating a theatrical piece where I'm sort of the end of the line, I guess, where I make the final decision about what goes in the piece. But that being said, when you're working with performers of such a high caliber, it seems a waste not to listen to them. And so in this piece and in other pieces, I've just been looking for more ways to bring the performers in as artists of equal status in the hierarchy, to sort of flatten the hierarchy out so that there isn't one in the same
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
Sort of like you would with a band, right? When you're arranging things in a band, you might bring in an idea for a song or a chart, but you work it out together so that it really plays up the strengths of everyone who is involved. And I am interested in that. There are different. You have varying ability to do this depending on the size of the ensemble that you're working with. So I think that there has to be adjustment there, but I'm trying to find ways to do that even within the scope of these larger pieces.
Yeah, I love that idea. It's something that we've been talking about a lot, actually, is that the gap between those of us that have to make decisions traditionally really far in advance of an actual production taking the stage, and the artists who are actually in the pit, on the stage, backstage, making that show happen, the gap in agency is pretty wide, and I think has gotten wider the longer our craft has been in existence. And we constantly talk about how do we shrink that gap. I don't think we're ever going to get away from having to make some decisions in advance, but there should be an opportunity for dialogue that's different.
Yeah. And I think the past year and a half has really shown us that, just because we had to be more communicative with each other in order to make this work,
Yeah.
and to have a performer who has to do it from home, they have to have a certain amount of autonomy. You have to let go a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think what happened was we saw this real blossoming of people's secret talents,
Yeah.
like people who secretly knew how to make these amazing films, like Ryan McKinney, who is a fantastic singer. And in this project, he's not singing, he's taken on the role of the cinematography. His wife is directing it, and they have these skills all the time. It's just that they never were given the opportunity to use them.
Right. So can you talk a little bit about how, you know, where am I trying to go? When you finish a project, typically you're working then with a company who's putting something on stage. And we've talked a lot about how this is just a different kind of proscenium for the work, a different frame for the work to exist in. So how has that part of the project been from your perspective, where it's not a theater company, which there are always issues with communication and voice and vision for a piece in a theatrical setting? I imagine some of those are the same and some of those are different, but this is quite different, because I'm not sure that you were on site when they were doing the filming of the piece. Or whether you had access to dailies or things like that. But what's that like to just hand it over and hope for the best?
I kind of like it. The reason I started doing opera and theater and not chamber music as much as I like the collaboration. I want to see something that is different than I might have thought it would be. I mean, and often I'll go into a piece with ideas about what I think it's going to look like, but I'm really excited usually by what other people come up with, because it's different than what I was thinking, and usually better, which is why I'm not a director.
Yeah.
So I didn't actually see the film until they sent me the rough cut, and it was great. Like, there were things in there that I hadn't thought of them including. Like, there's a lot of really beautiful use of B-roll with these really talented young actors. And I hadn't even considered that as a possibility when working on it, because we had first thought of this as a staged piece.
Right.
So the possibilities opened up by making it a film really sort of heighten the depth of what Jenny and Kathy created with their text. Like it's all in there. It's just now there's a visual representation of everything that's sort of alluded to in the text.
And I'm assuming, although maybe I shouldn't, because that's always dangerous, but you know, did you know at the outset, you mentioned you thought it would be a stage piece that you recorded. So did you have to make any alterations once you decided that it was going to be filmed? And was there anything that you were required to do with that, or was that all part of the other collaborators' work?
The one thing that I did was there are these sort of soundscape moments in the score that allow for transitions. And I just, I just said, the sound designer and I had a conversation, and he said, are you really attached to these and where they are? And I said, no, just as long as they serve the same function as they were in the score. And so they're pretty much in the same places that I had them before, but some of them are a little shorter and some are a little longer as was necessary for the film. But that's it. Otherwise, the score is the score. It didn't add any other instruments or sounds. It's just Kathy and Jenny through the whole thing. They perform the whole thing. Kathy is not overdubbing her piano, which I think is something important to point out, that she's actually playing and doing her acting at the same time. So it's interesting because it is the stage performance, but it isn't. It's like oh gosh, that Zeffirelli Traviata, where they're running around and singing, and it's a film and it's also an opera.
Yeah, it's so interesting to me too, because I went to the initial libretto reading that Kathy and Jenny held online, and I think it might have been after they spoke to you, but definitely before you had started work on it. So I heard it as a play almost, first as a radio play of sorts, and was so intrigued because it never occurred to me actually that Kathy would sing, but her particular skills as a prompter and a coach, being able to do those things while playing, is already part of her arsenal. And you could tell from the reading too that Jenny is not someone that would have shied away from any kind of dramatic interpretation, whether it was on the stage or on screen. And there are artists in our field who are so unused to working with camera that it's difficult for them to make the transition.
Yeah.
But I just, as you said, the use of people's skill set seems so unique to this project. I'm curious if you, now that you've had this experience of writing something that was originally for one idea that morphed into a film, have you written much that you knew was going to be film first?
I guess not in mostly the things that I've worked on recently that I knew were going to be for video were the telematic operas that I did, like All Decisions Will Be Made by Consensus and Only You Will Recognize This Signal.
Mm-hmm.
But both of those are different because they were intended to be performed live over Zoom and streamed out.
Yeah.
So you can't do camera angles, you can't do cuts.
Right.
I mean, you can sort of fudge around it by having a couple of different setups in the Zoom camera, or doing, like now you can use Isadora, which is video software, to change the look of the camera coming out of Zoom. But basically you get the box and you have to work with the box.
Yeah.
So I haven't done opera film really before. I have written scores for short films before, but the last one was like several years ago. And that's an entirely different thing because you're supporting the visual that's already there rather than leading as you would in the musical piece.
Yeah. Yeah. Does it make you hungry to write something for film exclusively?
I don't know. I mean, I think that the skill sets you need for film scoring, TV scoring are similar to what you do in theater and opera, because you are you're supporting the story, right? But the difference is in the who leads, right? So I
Sure.
like for the music to do a lot of the work, whereas in film I think the music would be more supporting, in a supporting role, which
Yeah.
is fine. I would find that interesting to do, but I think that it's not the main thing that I want to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, we are sort of still in limbo of sorts with the pandemic, and things are perhaps a little easier than they were at the start of this period back in March of 2020. But I'm curious what work looks like for you now, and how are you starting to imagine uh, what the next, I don't know, 18 to 24 months might look like for you?
I'm trying to figure that out too. Because right now I have things that are scheduled to be in person in the spring,
Yeah.
and hopefully they will still happen. I have things that are scheduled to be in person next summer that were canceled, so hopefully they won't be canceled again. I mean, they were canceled before and now they're back, and
Yeah.
hopefully they'll stay back. Um, but I think if anything, the last couple of years have taught me, not to take anything for granted, and to hold on to the ability to make things that are smaller and more flexible, as well as the things that are larger and take more of a giant cast of people working on them. Yeah. So, and I mean, I think we're all kind of taking the same lessons, is that there is something good about having a degree of flexibility, and also having different iterations that you're putting out. Like, not everything has to be big, it can be small also.
Yeah. What is the if you had to wish some sort of balance into your compositional work moving forward between work that is live and work that is designed for a digital format, do you have a balance that you think would be satisfying?
I'm not sure, because what drives my interest is the story. So if the story needs a digital format, great. If not, great. I think that's the main thing for me, is making sure I'm still working on things that feel resonant, and so coming up, I do have things that are digital and I do have things that are not. And the form that they take is really about the dramaturgy and how to support the story and the characters that we're
Yeah.
sharing through the piece.
Yeah, I love that, because I think that's a really important guiding force for all elements of the individual components of what make up opera, is how you are storytelling, and how you choose to use your particular gifts in service of that. How long was it? I'm assuming that you have heard some live music now at some point since the pandemic started. What was it like your first time being back in a space where you got to experience music in the same room as the people creating it?
I'm going to be honest, I cried a little. It was I was lucky because Chicago Opera Theater had been scheduled to do my piece Taking Up Serpents, and rather than canceling it, they pivoted very quickly to doing a filmed version that's streamed out. But I was still able to go to Chicago and
Cool.
be there in the room, because I had made some big revisions to it and I hadn't heard them yet.
Yeah.
And being in the room with an orchestra and people singing after not hearing it for over a year, it's just, you forget what that is. And it's really an emotional and powerful thing, because you don't get the immersive
Yeah.
feel of the instruments, the voices bouncing off the room. It's just a totally different thing.
Yeah, the thing I noticed, because it was, gosh, I think it was about 10 months between the time that we had to cancel rehearsals for a show that we were about to put up, and then the next time I was actually in a space with a piano and a singer, there was a member of our resident program who was going to do an audition, and they asked if we could come in. And by that point, we had established some safety protocols. And so we were in a very large space, and I was masked, and another member of my staff was masked, and then there were the two performers. And I remember that for the first time ever, perhaps, I could feel like on me what it felt like to be in a room with music. And I've often had emotional reactions to music and storytelling, and but it's been a more internal experience. And what I found so interesting was that this was physical for me,
Mhm.
and that was something I hadn't anticipated, and I also cried a little bit. I don't know. I'm happy that I'm human.
Yeah.
And that I didn't shut that off. What's bringing you joy or solace as we continue to work through the pandemic? Where are you finding strength?
I have found I was really lucky because the project that I've been working on most recently was a 10-hour long opera that I made for the trees of Prospect Park in New York. And so what it is I spent months interviewing people who research trees to ask them what would be music for a tree. And they said, well, pleasant sounds are the sounds of the healthy forest and of the community of the forest. So this piece was field recordings that I made after being in the forest. So there are all of these frogs and birds. And what was really great about that was I had spent a lot of the pandemic being in my apartment. And, I'm lucky in the Bronx in that we have access to parks and to more green areas.
Yeah.
But after you're still in the city, so then being forced to spend all of this time walking around in a forest was really, really amazing. And I think that this connection to nature and the outside is something that has really, I feel the difference. I feel when I go into the woods, I feel a change in my outlook. And so that has brought me a lot of joy. And I really hope that every other, I hear this from other people also, that the pandemic has forced them into nature in a way that they didn't really engage with it before. And I think that I'm hoping that we continue to hold on to that.
Yeah. What is it, as you think about approaching a piece like Interstate that has some pretty deep, when you're telling that story, the story is one that is deep and I think meaningful and complex. It's not all joyful. How do you find working in that environment and keeping yourself buoyed while you are exploring some themes that are a little darker?
I think it's important for us, as all of us as artists, as we work through this kind of material, from singers and directors to the writers themselves, to acknowledge that, say, yes, this is a dark place. I can't spend all of my time here, right? I have to be able to pull myself out of it and go take a walk and then come back. But that being said, I think it's also important to treat it respectfully. And what I mean by that is I could see a version of this story where it goes into sort of more the sensationalism of it. And that is part of the point that Kathy and Jenny are making with the script, is that a lot of the way the media treated Eileen Wuornos was about the sensationalism of the first female serial killer who was a prostitute who kills men on the highway, and never talking about how she got there or why or what societally we might have been able to do to prevent her from getting there. So I mean, I think that I was lucky because that was already in the text, so I could just deal with the emotional aspect of it to show the vulnerability that was inherent in the character. And that is how we sort of deal with the darkness of it, is to remember this is a human and this is a human experience, and we have to be willing to go there with her.
I think what's so interesting to me about the first time I heard the reading of the text, very much in the same way that I responded to the text in Terrence McNally's Dead Man Walking. There are our culture today is very binary and tries to put us in these boxes of good, bad, light, dark, very easy to, because it's efficient. And as humans, I know we're built for efficiency. We don't question how to put our trousers on in the morning. We just do it because it's efficient and you don't have to ask deep questions about where your leg goes. And that's part of just who we are as sentient beings, is finding those shortcuts so that you don't have to question every little thing. But what was so interesting about Interstate to me, in the same way the first time that I saw Dead Men Walking, is that it gives you a moment to just take some space and think about how this is not actually, she wasn't 100% bad or evil or not well educated, or there's all kinds of facets to her personality, the inspiration for the story and these characters that you see, and it was interesting to me how they so easily made the connection about how if one circumstance had been different for either of these women, we could be seeing the same story with them reversed. With their individual storylines having been reversed. And I don't know if there's ever been a class on how to teach empathy, but I feel like what you all have built, both with their story and the music that you provided that helps amplify that storytelling, that it's almost a class in empathy. And I'm wondering if that was, if you feel that, or if that was part of the goal, or if that just came out of the creative process.
Well, for me, that's always the goal, that you feel something for the people that you're seeing. And I think that's why I've tended to gravitate towards the kinds of stories that I have, because they're stories of people that are often unfamiliar. Most of us don't know somebody like Olivia or even Diane.
Yep.
And so I think for the audiences that are already going to opera, it's important because it reminds all of us of the breadth of the world that's out there. But for people like Olivia and Diane, it's also important in case they stumble across this piece to know, they're seen, they're represented.
Yeah.
So
I think it was, as you just spoke about that, part of what was catching me is that I knew coming into the story that I didn't know anyone personally like Olivia. I think I made some assumptions that maybe I did know someone like Diane, and the further the story unfolds, the more I realize we don't really know. Even if you think you know Diane, you don't know Diane. And for that matter, as much as I have gotten acquainted with you over the last few years, I don't really know you. And so there's still space for us to develop and think about our lives and connections in very different ways. And I think this piece provides us an opportunity to do that. So I'm so grateful for the work that you all did to bring it forward.
I'm really excited that it's been able to come to fruition. I'm excited that you all are supporting it. I'm excited for people to see it. It's very exciting.
Me too. And I've seen bits and pieces of it, but I've saved the opportunity because I want to watch it. It's one of those things that I do in the theater too. I rarely pick up a program when I go to see a new work because I just want to see it the way an audience member might experience it for the first time. And so I've seen enough of it, and I'm excited about it, and can't wait to share it with our public. But I'm just so grateful to be a part of it. So thank you for that.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, and thanks for taking the time with me today. I know that Zoom is not always the most fun But I've had a great time talking to you this
Yeah.
morning, and I hope that everything goes well with your future projects, and that we'll talk again soon.
Yes. Have a
Yeah.
great rest of your day.
Alrighty, you too.
Okay.
Thanks.